Hello and welcome to another Mixed Media Monday. As always, I'm here bringing you some different mixed media ideas, mixed media techniques, and creating a small work of art to kind of show those off. So anyway, today I wanted to do something a little bit different. Well, actually, it's very similar to some things that I've done before, but using a very different material. I want to use graphite. Now, graphite, you think of that as just, kind of our normal drawing pencils. And that's something that as a kid, as I was getting into art, I mean, I always had pencils and that was like the thing, I love to draw. And so I love going back to using graphite. But what's going to make this different is that I'm going to use a couple different types of graphite. The first is water-soluble graphite. And so this is just like watercolor pencil or water-soluble colored pencils that you shade with them and then paint water over them, and it has a water soluble binder that then the graphite kind of gets washed over the surface. And so I'm going to use that, and then I'm also going to use a brand new product that I haven't really used. It's a type of graphite, but it comes from Faber-Castell. Comes in a nice little tin. I got a little, I think there's 6 pencils in here. It is their matte pencil. So it's their Pitt Graphite Matte. And if you have ever used graphite, maybe you're into graphite drawing, you know that graphite is very shiny, especially whenever you're layering it down and you're using those really soft leads, and it gets really super shiny. So this matte is, I don't think it's totally matte. It just has a lot of reduced it reduces the shininess, the reflection. So I haven't used them before. I mean, I got them the other couple weeks ago maybe, and I haven't really had a chance to sit down and use them, but I did test them out just to kind of see what they are. And the great thing is that they have a very high dark black lead. So it goes up, if you're familiar with how graphite works, it's either rated with H's or B's or both. So H means hardness and the B's are for softness. I'm not sure where the B comes from. Some of you might know. So if you know, put it in the comments. But it's basically the higher the number. So if it's like an 8B, which is usually, that's typically what regular normal graphite pencils go up to, is 8B. That's as soft, as dark as you can go. And 8H would be very hard. And you get a very light mark with a very hard graphite pencil. So anyway, these graphite pencils go up to like 14B. So even darker than what typical with graphite. I think the set I have goes up to 12B. So I'm kind of excited to try out some of those darker values. But anyway, let's go ahead and switch it over, and I'll show these materials in action. So I'm working on a slightly larger piece of paper. This is a 6x8 inch piece of the Strathmore mixed media paper. I'm going to be using, like I said, the matte. That's what's in here. And then I've got a set of 6, like I said, goes from 2B up to 12B. And then I've got 3 water-soluble pencils. I'll probably use maybe just one because I can really control the value. So this is an 8B. Again, this is a Faber-Castell, but a lot of different companies make water-soluble graphite. Sometimes they even make it into a stick, so it's more like a crayon. You can really cover some big areas. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of play around, and yeah, I'm just trying to think. I want to get some lines in here. So maybe I'll just kind of I'm just being very free with my marks, really light. It's kind of washed out. Let me go ahead and just darken this a little bit, change the exposure. There we go. Never know exactly how the paper is going to show up on the video. So anyway, like I said, I'm trying to be really light, really kind of loose. I'm not really sure where how this is going to develop. Okay. So just kind of relying a lot on curves. Um, so for me, the biggest problem now is like, okay, what do I start to shade in? And so I start to pick out lines. So this, I work, when I use the graphite, a lot of times I work a little bit different because I'm just using the graphite. I mean, I could kind of work the way I do with the water-soluble pencil, like the Inktense pencils. But what I'm doing here is I kind of laid out a composition before I started. And I'm just shading. This is an 8B pencil. I'm not pressing hard. I don't want a lot of dark value yet. So like I said, sometimes I do work with them similarly to the Inktense pencils. I'll start off very light and do different layers. But today I think I'm just gonna, like I said, I sketched out a little composition. And at this point, I'm being pretty rough. I'm not trying to be super, super, sorry. A lot of times whenever I'm trying to shade and draw, it's like I lose track of what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm not trying to go super dark, and I'm not trying to like get really perfect shading. I'm just roughing it in because I know this is water soluble. And so it's going to smooth out with the water. So I'm just trying to like lay in, like this is a little bit darker than this. There's a little bit of darkness here, it gets lighter. So it starts to look like this side is tucked in underneath that line there. So I'm just trying to establish some different values. Like I said, I'm not going super dark. I'm not too worried about it being very neat and all that right now. Okay. All right, so I've got, it's real rough. And that's exactly what I want. Let's go ahead and start brushing the water over it. So when I do this, it's very similar to the Inktense pencils, so it's going to dissolve the graphite and whatever binder. So graphite, I'm not 100% certain like what goes into a graphite pencil. I remember reading one time that there's the graphite, that's what gives it the mark making capability, but it's got like clay in it, I think the graphite leads do, and other materials in there that kind of keep it all together. But anyway, so this has a water soluble binder. So things have a binder with watercolor paint. A lot of times it's gum arabic. With oil based paints, it's some type of oil, a lot of times linseed oil. With acrylic paints, the binder is liquid polymer, which is basically a liquid plastic. So when it dries, it turns to plastic. And like I said, not 100% certain what the binder is for graphite, but I imagine with the water soluble ones, it's probably got You know, it's got something in there that the water is going to dissolve. I like this because you can see, I mean, look at the difference. Look how more solid this looks than over here. So if you've tried shading before with uh with graphite pencil and you find it really, number one, time consuming, and then number two, maybe even difficult, this is kind of this is a nice way to get started, because what it does is that it covers up the white paper and just gives you more of a solid look to the work. And this graphite's dissolving really easily. It's spreading. It's fairly smooth. So I've used this water soluble graphite many times, and I like the Faber-Castell uh, water soluble graphite because it does come in different hardnesses. So that way you do have a range of pencils that give you a nice range of value, even though I tend to use the darker, the softer, you know, the 8Bs, the 6Bs, even 2B. And there's some manufacturers where it's like they only have like one hardness, and sorry, there I am talking and then all of a sudden getting lost in what I'm doing. Um, you know, and it ends up being a really soft pencil. You just like with shading, you get the different values by your pressure. And with this, you know, I didn't put a lot of pressure on it. So even the places where I had some darker value, it's not very dark now. But you can see that I'm starting to get some depth. So where the pencil's a little bit darker, looks like it goes into the space. And then, you know, it's what's nice is that, you know, here where it's darker, you know, it shows up a little bit darker, but then I can take some of that graphite and move it out. If I want to lighten it, just dip my brush in the water. That kind of gets rid of a little bit of the graphite, puts more water in my brush. And then I have, you know, it goes from dark over to light. I used some watercolor earlier and got a little, I don't know if you could see that there was a little bit of a blue tint to the water when I put it down. So what I want to try to, there it goes again. Need to remember to rinse out get clean water before I start these things. That's all right. So what I'm trying to do is I'm going to end up getting water all over the paper. So that way everything is kind of toned. And it's kind of rough right now, and that's fine. Now, the thing is, since I am kind of painting all over the paper, I do get rid of the white, but you know, the white should really just be the highlights anyway. And I can always come back and add those in some other way. Sometimes I'll use a white acrylic paint with these as well. I don't know if I'll do that today. All right, let's go ahead and dry this. Okay, so I do want to make sure that I get it nice and dry. Just make sure I still have my 8B. So I'm still using the same pencil doing the 8B. So this is where some layering comes in. I could go to the matte graphite pencils right now and do some shading, but I do want to go ahead and get a little bit more value with my water soluble pencils. And so this is where I start to go a little bit darker. So I'm going to press a little bit harder. And I've got kind of an awkward shape. It might be hard to see on the video, but there's like almost a straight line and almost a corner. So this is where I start to refine edges as well. So I'm still not pressing super hard with the pencil. It's an 8B, so it's pretty dark. Pretty dark without pressing hard. Now maybe right in this corner, maybe I'll go a little darker. Kind of feel like I want a little bit of something happening inside this circle. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll just kind of continue and do everything like this, but other times I will kind of do it section by section. Now I want to fade this darker value into the background. So I'm going to put down some water in the background and then go in and touch the graphite. And that allows me to fade it in. You get to see just how much darker that becomes. Again, putting the water out away from where the graphite is. And then I can fade it in. If I need to, I can rinse off my brush, get rid of some of that graphite that's built up if it's kind of a little too dark. I don't have to worry about really fading it out too much on this side, but I will put a little bit of water there before I hit the darker values. I do have a smaller brush. So I'm not too worried right now if the edges aren't super crisp and clean, or if I've, kind of gone outside the line a little bit. It's not a big deal right now. So by having that dark around the edge of that circle or that oval that I just did, it makes it look like this little part is down lower than this part. And I have a little bit of a shadow. And notice that I still had a little bit of graphite on my paintbrush. So if I can put a little bit of that over here, make it look a little bit more like a sphere. I rinsed out my brush, got cleaner water, and then I can fade that out. And now that starts to look more 3D, a little bit more rounded. So while that dries, I can go ahead and do the same thing to other parts. So it's just the same thing, just shading, figuring out where do I want it to be darker. Now this little circle here kind of gets faded, but I want this half here to be underneath. Um, so I want to make that darker. Now on this side, it might be kind of interesting if this like part of the circle kind of seems like it's floating above. So a little bit of shadow around that. I have a line that's going across here that's kind of faded, but I can put it back in. Okay, let's go ahead and get some water painted over. Again, starting out away from the graphite and then get going into it. That way I can drag some of that back and can fade into the wet paper. A little bit of a small space, get that smaller brush. So I want to keep it lighter right around the edge of that circle. That's going to make a nice contrast with the darker value that's inside of the circle. Okay, I want a little bit more control inside the circle, so I'm going to use my smaller brush. Now, once I paint over the graphite, I wouldn't say it's permanent. I mean, I can go back in and re-wet it and blend it with the brush, but I won't be able to erase it completely. But usually you can erase it and lighten it a little bit. I think what happens is that the water kind of pushes the graphite down into the fibers of the paper. So while this is drying over here, I'm gonna go over here and work. Trying to figure out the best way to turn my paper. So if I forget like I did here, I started in the graphite and you can really see that there's like a line here. So I dip my brush into the water, get cleaner water, and then I can fade it out. So I don't always have to start out here where there's nothing going on. Okay. I want to keep this a little bit lighter right here because there's going to be an edge, kind of like a lip. So just working with that smaller brush. Now I'm going to kind of let that dry just a little bit. Up here where there's a lot of water, I have sort of a hard edge. So I'm just going to take my brush, try to blend it out. Same thing, I got a very similar thing here. Okay. So I'm going to jump over here. So by jumping around, I can kind of avoid wet spots if I don't want things to bleed and blend together too much. So again, I put the shading around the outside. It makes that part pop up. And my dogs are probably telling me that my wife is home. As I've mentioned many times before, it's the wonders of recording from a home studio when you have dogs who like to bark. Oh well. So I'm kind of just jumping back and forth between brushes. I'm really liking, this is a filbert brush, and you can see that the tip is a little bit rounded, but it's also flat in the other direction. So it's rounded in one direction, flat in the other. And this is just a round brush. So the bristles come to a nice point and it's just rounded. But I'm really digging the filbert. I haven't really used the filbert much. One thing is with my dogs, I don't have to worry about an alarm system. All right. Okay, so that part's done. I just want to, this is sort of like the last bit that I want to do. Yeah, nice thing with the water-soluble pencil, I don't have to be super neat with the shading. All right, that's fairly dry. I want to put a darker spot in there. And then You know, it's like even this graphite is a little bit shiny. I don't know if you can see that little circle is a little bit shiny, but as soon as I put the water over it, it makes it less shiny. Yeah, I like working this way, kind of jumping around because it gives areas time to dry as you're working. So then, you know, you can kind of keep bouncing around. And of course, I have my hair dryer if I need it. Okay. So I'm getting, you know, getting something going. I do have one thing. I have some lines here. I think this is dry enough. I put these lines in, so I'm just going to come in. The paper might not be totally dry right now, but I just want to get a little bit of that in. Maybe I'll use my smaller brush. So I'm pretty much done with the graphite. There's some darker values over here, not so many over here, but I'll put those in with the other pencil. So I'm gonna go ahead and dry this. I want this to be totally dry. So I got my hair dryer. So if I let this dry naturally, there's going to be less curling. The hair dryer really dries that fast and makes that the surface shrink, and that's why it curls. That's why, you know, if you hit the back of it, they'll a lot of times kind of soften the curl, won't completely uncurl it. All right, so I've got, it's pretty dry. Yeah, it's all dry now. I'm gonna go ahead and start with the graphite. So again, this is a new material. I haven't really used it. I'm gonna start with the 2B. Um, and I'll skip. I'll probably go like 2B, 8B, 12B or something like that, just to kind of see. Now, the nice thing is that everything kind of has a value on it. So I don't have to do this all over, but this is going to allow me to start to go in and straighten and refine edges. So if my edges got a little bit messy, and then I'm just going to shade. I'm not one that blends, so I usually don't take a blending stick or a tissue and blend it. I don't like doing that. I think there's a quality of the graphite if you don't do that. But that's what I love about the water soluble. It gives you that kind of blended look because it covers up all the white. It gets into all those little cracks and all those little crevices. If I want to be really light with my touch, I move my fingers back on the pencil. So I'm trying not to get so caught up in the shading. That's one thing, since this is kind of like, the oldest form of art that I've done is the pencil drawing and shading. Sometimes I can get real uh, persnickety. I like that word. Um, just that perfectionism comes out, and it's like, oh, I got to make it, I got to do this. And I get really kind of caught up in it, which is sometimes it's good because I can just sit for hours doing this. But I can work pretty quickly. Like I said, I don't have to shade everything in because I have value down. I have a lot of those lighter values down. So my aim now is really just kind of making the edges a little bit more defined, kind of sharpening the edges, sometimes making things darker if it needs to be darker. Sometimes it's kind of evening out the value. Sometimes you get watermarks, just where there may have been a puddle of water. So you get like these rough edges, or sometimes the materials bleed. So if you have a dark area and you touch it with water, sometimes the dark can bleed over into the light areas. So the matte graphite pencils are working just like regular graphite. I mean, shade's just the same. It's not, I can move it around and there's not a lot of shininess on it, which is good. But at this point, even with a regular graphite, there might not be a lot of sheen to it. Maybe like down here where it's a little bit darker. But I'm going to move to the 8B here in a little bit. So I didn't have a whole lot of dark over here, to balance out the dark over there. So now's the chance to start that. And I'm going to build it up. Some people will be like, oh, well, just grab the 8B and just go dark. I like to build it up, layer the different softnesses, different degrees of pencils. Sometimes the effects of the shading is pretty subtle, but it just sort of tightens everything up. Like right here on these lines, and really bring a little bit of definition to the edges, smooth out the shading, make some areas a little bit darker, make them stand out a little bit more. So getting there, let me go ahead. I'm going to switch. I'm going to go to the 8B. So this is typically where the value range ends with most graphite pencils. Some have 9B. You can just see how that's adding some dark value into that corner. I mean, it's not totally matte. There is a little bit of a sheen to it, but not like there would be with the regular graphite. The nice thing is that this is like more black than regular graphite. And I'll jump up to that 12B after I'm done with this 8B. I'm not going to go do too much with the 8B, just trying to pick out some darker values. Like I said, I could spend all day just sitting here and shading with this. Let's go ahead and go into this little circle here. So the nice thing is that with the softer pencils, you don't have to press so hard to get the dark values. Yeah, so if I pick it up and I start to move it around, I mean, there's a little bit of a sheen, like right there, you can kind of see it in the corner. But like I said, not as bad as it would be if it was just regular graphite. So I really want to try to get some darker values over here to make it a little bit more balanced. Okay, I'm going to jump up and use the 12B. So this does go up to 14B, but I don't have that. This is just a limited set. I think it goes down to HB. So HB would be the hardest. I have to double check that, but they don't make H's out of these because the idea is that you want a really soft, dark value. But you can buy them in sets like this, or you can buy them individually. Okay, so I mean, I could probably work on this for a really, really long time. Um, I don't know if it's finished, but you really kind of get the idea. I mean, I feel like maybe you could have some darker values, some more textures. I don't know, but I just was just kind of wanting to play with the water soluble graphite and these new matte matte graphite. So I'm gonna go ahead and sign it. All right, I'm gonna call it finished. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed another Mixed Media Monday and enjoyed this look at using the water soluble graphite along with the new matte graphite pencils. Just a great combination. The water soluble really allows you to kind of lay the foundation, get a lot of nice values going, and then the regular graphite or the matte graphite allow you to go back and really build into those values that you've created. And because it's relatively matte, there's a little bit of a sheen to it. It doesn't come out as shiny as regular graphite. So yeah, maybe that's something that you would like to try yourself. So anyway, if you have any questions or comments or whatever, just pop them into the comments and I'll try to respond to them. And yeah, I really appreciate you being here. And as always, happy creating.